Hi, everyone. It is great to be here today at our OR Group Talks. I think we're live now and really excited to be welcoming everybody here. It looks like people are trickling in here. So we'll just give another moment before we get into the real meat of our discussion today. But as all of you know, we are focusing today around fundraising in uncertain times. And I am really pleased to introduce Eileen Heisman here today, the CEO of National Philanthropic Trust. She'll tell you more about her background and role, but really wanted to just welcome all of you here to this conversation. We are really looking forward to exploring current fundraising trends, thinking more about planning strategies in the face of uncertain economic times, and then also to really talk more about the relevance of donor-advised funds and alternative assets in personal philanthropy. So those are some of the objectives we have here today. Just a quick housekeeping item. We're going to dedicate 30 minutes to more of a fireside chat format here, and then 30 minutes to Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, please put them into the Q&A section of the chat. We'd also love to know who's here today. So in the chat function, if you want to say hello and introduce what organization you're from, where you're joining us from, we'd love to see that. And if there's any way that you all want to connect with each other, use the chat function to do that, but please try to use the Q&A section for questions you have that we'll be exploring later in this conversation. Thanks, Kara. All right, perfect. We have someone here from Pittsburgh today. So I'll introduce myself really quickly and then turn it over to Eileen, and then we'll start going through this conversation. I'm Amanda Nelson, a vice president at OR Group. Our firm works with nonprofit organizations in a lot of ways, but really our focus is in fundraising, strategy, helping build and scale organizations. And we're really excited about the opportunity to talk to Eileen today because we have seen so much impact with National Philanthropic Trust. And I was just looking at some of your numbers, Eileen. You have given grants over $23.6 billion in total. It's really staggering when you think about that. And I love the mission of increasing philanthropy in society. That's something that really excites us about working with nonprofit organizations. So again, thank you so much for being here today with us for our OR Group Talks. And thank you everybody in the audience for joining today. Eileen, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then I've got some questions for you.
Great, thanks, Amanda, and thanks everybody who's joining us. It's great to see so many people online. I can actually see the numbers. Well, so my name's Eileen Heisman. I'm CEO of the National Philanthropic Trust. I've been here since we launched in '96 by a really small family office. And fast forward to now, I guess 27 years, which is hard to believe. NPT is one of the fastest growing charities in the United States. We've raised over $40 billion, have given away, that number, and we are now about 26 billion as assets under management. My previous role, my previous charitable roles, I was the first development officer at the Philadelphia Foundation between '86 and '92, and I was director of planned giving at two large hospital systems, at Abington Hospital and at Einstein, where I did a lot of life income gifts. And before that, I was actually a political fundraiser. I was a finance director for Arlen Specter's '86 campaign for the US Senate, a national campaign. I was 31 years old. I was like getting thrown to the wolves. And I had been also a political fundraiser for Senator Specter's wife, Joan Specter, was a city councilwoman in Philadelphia City Council after being her legislative aide for 4 years. And I worked as an internship at the Congressional Budget Office, and I actually worked in mental health earlier in my career. And my mother had been a psychiatric nurse, so I briefly became my mother and then decided I could love my mother, but I didn't have to do the same work as she did. And so I moved into the political arena and then the charitable arena. And with this, and there was a theme there, which is I always wanted to make the world a better place. And so I thought about that a lot as a young person. And so the idea that I got to do it at the scale that I have is remarkable to me, a lot. But I really devoted and love the work that I get to do all the time. So I feel very lucky. Carnegie Mellon, I went to undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon University, and I got the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2019, right before COVID, and then have a graduate degree from the University of Michigan in social program evaluation from the School of Social Work. And I'm on a national advisory committee there. But I think most of all, I feel really connected to mission-driven work. And even though donor advised funds are a step removed from the direct impact, I really have enormous gratification every day knowing that our grants going out are to make the world a better place in all different ways, more diverse than I could count or include. Our donors, we have about 15,000 donors that give to charities all over the country and the world. In the last 10 years, we've started 2 charities in the UK. We went global, one for dual tax status donors, the other one for global donors. So we are trying to have the use of donor advised funds spread beyond the United States to be in Europe and beyond. And we've made grants to 75 countries and accepted donations from donors in 23 countries. That's just in the US, not counting our UK activity. So our footprint has become global. And of course, I'm delighted and proud to be very involved in the global work. And I wasn't raised in wealth. I wasn't raised by a philanthropic family. I didn't even know this kind of job existed when I was growing up. And so it's been really wonderful to be this adventuresome kind of path that we were on. And I had no idea when we launched, and I got to be CEO 2 years later. So we launched in 96, I became CEO in 98. I had no idea that we were going to be in the journey we've been on, and I personally would be on it as well. And so I've learned a lot, and I have a team of 3 originally, and now a team of about 210 people just in Philadelphia outside, but also around the country and the world. So here I am. And so I'm so happy to be here. I teach a class in philanthropy and fundraising at Penn for 17 years. And there's nothing that makes me happier than being in front of my class talking about this work, not just donor advised funds, but the work in general. So I'll stop there.
I haven't gotten to know Eileen a little bit. She didn't even tell you everything about her background yet, but I think it's really exciting to hear what you talked about, that global perspective and the platform you have. We definitely have some international organizations here today, so that was wonderful insight. We know we get a lot of questions from global organizations, but because of that view that you have, and because of the amount of donors you're working with, it would be great to talk a little bit about current fundraising trends and hear from you about that. And something I'd love to ask you about is about some of the challenges and opportunities that nonprofits are currently facing with some economic uncertainty and questions around this. Can you speak a little bit to that for us?
Sure. I think when the market is so in flux and there's been so much political turmoil, in the Ukraine and also in our own country, it's so polarized right now, questioning the election, the events of yesterday, of having the first president ever be indicted for a federal crime. It's kind of hard to imagine that just happened. I think that when we have this kind of uncertainty, so economic uncertainty is one thing, the political uncertainty, both with globally and domestically, you get donors, I think, are more nervous about their wealth. And of course, when donors part with charitable gifts, they part irrevocably, which means they can't get it back. So they have to feel comfortable that they're going to have enough money to live and to exist. Billionaires don't worry about it like the upper middle class, which may be a lot of the annual donors or middle class folks, but even they, and we have some of those donors, even they can get nervous about what the future beholds. So I think that it diminishes giving, and especially everyday modest annual gifts that donors give really can suffer during economic uncertainty. The other thing, and we're getting to a political year, a presidential election year. I've been a frontline fundraiser. I don't do it anymore. I actually miss it. But the piece, I know people think everybody wants to give away money. I always loved the fundraising, and the grant making was never my thing. But this idea of being in a presidential year, I've often seen people hold back until after the presidential election, even making an annual gift. And so you layer on that the Ukraine and the interest rates and the polarization and the economic, the inflation. You put all that together, and we're a fairly uncertain time, and then you add the presidential election. I think people are going to be holding back in 2024. I do believe, though, that their interest in charitable giving is the same. I think their behavior temporarily changes. So one of the things I always recommend is to use these downturns to keep making your case in whatever way you can, whether it's digital, whether it's in person, whether it's email, whether it's videos. I mean, you can't get paralyzed by this. And I think that can be a big disadvantage to people that are either inexperienced fundraisers or have board members telling you, don't go out, don't do anything, don't go out. This is a perfect time to go out. And so it's the time to make friends. It's the time to explain what you're doing. It's the time to make the case for support over and over again. And so do not get paralyzed in these downturns. And I had a coach early on at NPT who was not even a formal coach, who was somebody who'd been in the business world. And he said, and it was during the 08-09 downturn. And he said, don't get shy. Don't be shy now. Now's the time. And I thought it was really, really great advice. And I've not only abided by it, but I've encouraged my staff, who now do a lot of direct fundraising, much more than I do, not to stay in the, even during COVID, do not stay in the office, even though you might be on Zoom. Make sure you're still out there. So I just want to acknowledge all that and acknowledge that it's hard. And I think small charities have a harder time. We know that 20 million fewer households are giving than gave a decade ago or more than a decade ago. So we know those modest givers are even more pulled back. And so I think it takes more work or a focus on a higher net worth audience to make sure that you can capture the kind of assets you need to meet your mission. And I don't think it's easy. The thing that's much different than when I started is how many more venues there are to go out. You can text somebody, you can send an email, you can do Zoom, you can be in person. There's so many more ways to talk to donors, but they all have to be strategic, they all have to be thoughtful, and you can't miss the opportunity to make your important points as early as you can and not build up to them. When people come to me often with written pieces, I said, you're burying the lead. You need to stay right up front. You can't write it like an academic paper. You need to stay right up front why you're talking to them and what you want to say and what you want them to do, the call to action, because I don't think people have a lot of patience for reading a lot of copy these days.
We say that a lot, lead with the lead in the case for support documents. And I love what you're talking about here around developing effective strategies heading into this. And you referenced a little bit about smaller organizations maybe needing to think about this differently or facing different challenges. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What are larger organizations looking at? What can they do? What are smaller organizations needing to prioritize? What can they do heading into these uncertain times?
So I think the bigger organizations, hospitals, universities, colleges, they're all planning, not all, but many of them are planning their next campaigns already. They're doing their feasibility studies. They're beyond the feasibility study stage, and they're starting to go to their leadership gifts. I know because I've consulted with a couple of them informally. I don't do consulting, but and they've been talking about, because they often will say, how do we attract donors from donor advised funds? And so I think the big charities are doing things in the same way they were always doing them. And I don't think they were shy during COVID. I do think that we all had to learn how to use Zoom in ways that we probably never wanted to, but we did. And I think a lot of people are out in the world. But I think that the big charitable entities are pretty much business as usual. And planning as though things are going to keep going on like that. I know smaller colleges are suffering now more. I think that they're merging more. I just had news yesterday in Philadelphia that Salus University, which is an optometry and health, very small college, is merging into Drexel, creating a partnership. So I know that some of the smaller schools are having more difficulty, not surprisingly, but I think the bigger schools are doing well. I think for small and medium-sized charitable organizations, you really have to be cultivating your live bunts and side bunts. You have to be looking at your database really carefully. You have to look at people who have given in the past, but maybe not given recently. And you have to look at those as your best friends and figure out ways to get them engaged. I would also look for, to the extent you have really good databases, and I hope you all do, because I think it makes a big difference. You can see what kind of campaigns they responded to in the past. If, you're a healthcare organization, did somebody respond to something about maternity or cancer or orthopedics or something? If you're in the arts, when people are giving, when you're doing certain kinds of performances or, or exhibits, and I think you have to look at looking at donor, the pools of donors who are interested in very specific things, and maybe look at those more narrowly and send out a few campaigns based on what donors have given to in the past. I think the data is going to be really important, and if you don't use a good database, it's going to be much harder to get it. But I think you have to figure out who the donors are that have been loyal in the past, what they've given to and why, and use the same kind of technique and cause to attract them to come in again. I do also think that, for most people, COVID is over, not over, but the world is out. People aren't masked anymore. Invite them in. The closer they are to see the causes up front and as personal as they can, I would absolutely not hesitate to do that. I mean, I think major gift fundraising probably has changed the least in a way. You have to identify who those major donors are, whether they're past donors or whether you're doing prospect research on your annual giving donors, and figure out how to do a cultivation strategy. I'm a big fan of moves management. I'm a big fan of really mapping it out. In one of my classes last year, I had one of my former students come in who did major gift work at a children's hospital in the East Coast. And she talked about how carefully every effort was to map out a cultivation strategy for the donor, and who was going to talk to the donor and what their interests were, and how every touch was going to be with that donor. And she has closed a lot of successful gifts. And so the art and science of doing that can't be overlooked. And so I think for your smaller donors, you have to obviously find more cost-effective ways to talk to them, but you can still look at the ways and the times in which they gave more narrowly. I'll give you a real example of something that happened to me when I was director of plan giving at a hospital. We did a lot of gift annuities at the time, and they cut my marketing budget in half. It was during an economic downturn. They cut my marketing budget in half, and I couldn't believe it. But my goal was the same. I know I was like, you sick to your stomach, right? But I was like, okay, I'm up for this challenge. And I looked at all the zip codes and where my donors actually gave. So I looked at all the zips in which people asked for information. And then I looked at the zip codes where the gifts I actually closed. And I decided not to market. We were doing direct mail then, but I decided not to market to the zip codes where people were interested in the gift annuities but actually didn't make a gift. I only marketed to those zip codes in which I actually successfully closed the gifts. And I was able to close I closed in excess of I did the year before with half the marketing dollars, because I was able to really target a group based on zip code of actual behavior, donor behavior. And it was a real lesson for me. And I missed educating the other donors. I missed talking to them. They were from neighborhoods that weren't quite as affluent, but for that moment in time, it was really important that that I abide by the big marketing budget cut that I had. And so there are ways you can segment donors, whether it's zip code or interests or when they gave or things like that. And I really encourage you to look and examine that data, and also not to lose your enthusiasm for the work. I do think that, you can get worn down sometimes. So take a vacation, do a yoga class, to meditate, whatever it takes you to kind of stay excited about it. Because when you're down in the dumps because something happened, but it comes through. It comes through. And so you need to stay positive in whatever way, whether you're a runner. I'm not a runner, but I've done Zumba a lot. I do a lot of yoga, and I just really think that time away allows you to recharge yourself, and hold a mirror up to yourself if you don't know it, and think, is it today a day that I need that kind of an oomph? Because I really do believe this kind of work can really be hard emotionally.
This theme around staff engagement and staff retention is so important. We saw such a shift with people leaving jobs and starting new roles during COVID. It's something we're thinking a lot about. Would love to hear your perspective, especially as organizations aren't exactly sure what's going to be going on. Can you talk a little bit about staff retention, either from what you're seeing or from your own leadership experiences. Would love to hear your thoughts on this and why it matters in uncertain times.
Well, for staff retention and development, there's incredible relationships that people build. And when you leave, it doesn't matter the notes that you have, hopefully have put in the file in the database, but you're taking the relationship out the door. And that's really, really difficult for the charitable organizations. So if you're somebody who's in a leadership role, and I know it's hard to do this, but people often leave for a few thousand extra dollars. And I will say that for a few thousand extra dollars, doing a search and getting somebody on board who's new and has to learn the organization, learn the donors, make the relationship, it's probably worth thinking about how you can retain, whether it's a spot bonus or a raise or a promise to go to more educational programs. But it's really important to try to find ways to keep people there with the relationships, but hear what their problems are, hear what their issues are, hear if they're not being treated well by somebody, try to listen. And we've had a really challenging time, I think, all over the sector, and whether we should work remotely or work back in the office. And I'm a real fan of hybrid. I'm actually a real fan of more in the office and less hybrid, because I feel like that relationship, that tactile relationship, doesn't develop in the same way when you're just talking to people on Zoom all the time. But, for somebody that has young kids or sick family members, the working at home can be really important. So it's almost person by person. I do believe that mentoring young people is much easier in person than it is in Zoom. And I do believe that not everybody who's a young professional knows what they're missing, because if they started working during Zoom, they think that's the norm for them. Those of us, and I'm a baby boomer, by diehard baby boomer, is that, I can't imagine having learned what I learned. I used to listen over the cubicle. My best mentor in donor cultivation and stewardship by a long shot was a woman when I worked at Abington Hospital, and we had open cubicles, and she was next to me across an open hall area, and I could hear every word that she said, and it was like getting a master's degree in donor cultivation and stewardship. And I said, wow, that's how you do that. That's how you do that. And because I could hear her all day, and you just don't get that kind of experience. She would take me on, when I first started, she would take me on this donor cultivation visits when a donor would come in with her and just say, oh, Eileen's coming, she's new. And I would walk around with her and watch her, introduce the donors to doctors, or looking at new equipment, or identifying. She knew which physicians were friendly to development. It was so interesting. And if we were on Zoom, none of those things would have happened. And so I think that kind of mentoring and ways in which you can hear what people say, hear how they act in conflict, hear how they act when things are going well. I think it's really hard to get that sense in Zoom. But I think that as bosses, that people's problems are real, and you have to be sensitive to them. The first moment somebody tells me they have a sick child, sick parent, or there's been a mishap in their family, I say leave. Go. And sometimes they won't go. I may sometimes have to make people promise that they'll leave, but I just think that you have to be sensitive to family issues. You have to be sensitive to ways in which people might have problems, they had health problems, whatever. And because you would get chits in the bank with them, and then they have chits in the bank with you, and they're your employees. It's the most important asset that you have. And I just want to, we can't ignore that. And so, we're not in the military. That being said, have a high bar of productivity, be clear about what you expect from people, but then reward it when it happens. Reward it. Say thank you a lot. I say thank you all the time. And sometimes it's not gifts, and sometimes it's not even money. It's really thanking people and acknowledging. One time I forgot to thank somebody, and the person was brought to tears. And I said to her later, I know I upset you. I'm sorry. Why? And she said to me, I filled in for somebody when they were when we had a talent gap, when somebody resigned, and you didn't even acknowledge it or thank you. And I just realized she was right. So, you have to know when to, as a boss, you need to know when to own things, and when to say, what, I need to be more appreciative. And that was I think I'm good at it, but I had a moment where I wasn't, and it sort of re-energized me to really think about it more. That happened about a year ago. And so there's a lot of things bosses can do. And I think we promote people without training them how to be managers. So if you're a new manager somewhere, you know, see the best, most cost-effective ways. If you can go to online seminars, you know, the AMA, the American Management Association, has great seminars. A lot of them are not expensive. I know AFP has them. So learn how to be a manager. Don't just think it's intuitive. It's really, really not. And think about ways in which you can really also encourage others to do it as well. It's really important. It's not intuitive.
This is like such meaningful advice. It's not invest a ton of money. It's not try some new trend. These are things that for all of us here on this call, hearing you talk about this and hearing your own personal experiences around retaining staff and growing donor relationships and analyzing data. I really appreciate you sharing these examples with all of us as we're thinking about what can we do? This is intimidating. I don't know how to approach it. These seem like things that all of us can actually start doing right now. So really appreciate you bringing it to that level of perspective for us. I'd love to also, Eileen, pick your brain a little bit about engaging DAF donors. You talked, about donor data and reaching these donors and being mission focused and not getting paralyzed, but actually getting out there, leading with the lead on the case. We're all trying to figure out, with donor advised funds, what can we do better? What should we be doing that maybe other organizations are doing, but we don't know because we don't talk to them about this? Would love to hear from you about this evolution and how these are accessible tools for all levels of donors and what organizations can be doing better.
So I think that there's some critics of donor advised funds that talk about our dormant capital. I think this is really important. We give out in excess of 20% of our capital a year. So private foundations give out 5%. We give out 20%. And they have about 5 times the amount of assets we have. So they're a much bigger pool of money giving out a much smaller amount of money. And we're a smaller amount of money giving out a much greater percentage. And in fact, even though private foundations have 5 times the amount of assets that donor advised funds have right now, we gave half of what they did last year. So they have 5 times the amount, but our grant making collectively in all the DAF sponsors were half, and that's the 1,000 charities that were surveyed. So I just want to make sure that you know that we're giving out 20% of a much smaller pool of money. The private foundation's a bigger pool of money, giving out 5%, which includes overhead. Our 20% does not include overhead. So our salary, our rent is not included in our 20%. It is in the private foundations. Our donors are your major gift donors. They're your annual giving donors, and so if you live and work near a community foundations will often join the charities, the recipients, and the donors together in events, in specialized topics, educative, it's about education or healthcare. They'll often do that kind of gathering. The national donor advised funds, because we are national, we have 15,000 donors literally all over the country and even the world. We don't do collective donor education events. It would be literally impossible to do it. That would be of interest. We have conservative donors, liberal donors. We have donors that are interested only in the environment, only in education. We have donors that live in 4 or 5 locations. I mean, so there's no such thing as a donor advised fund donor profile. It's like every kind of person. And so we encourage folks there's 2 different ways that I'd suggest. One is to have donor advised fund friendly language in all of your materials. So if you have a major gift pledge card or a campaign pledge card or even an annual giving letter, or an email, you can check off, I plan to make a gift for my donor advised fund. I plan to make a gift. And a lot of charitable organizations, and I give a lot, actually. I'm pretty philanthropic in my life. And one of my favorite parts of filing taxes, you guys are going to think I'm really weird, is adding up all my charitable contributions. And I make really small gifts, bigger gifts. But this idea that you can, are being asked, and I get asked all the time, and I'd say 90% of the times I'm asked, nobody ever mentions the money might come from a DAF. So I would put DAF-friendly language in your response vehicle, even in your letter, in your email, in your campaign materials, because it's the fastest growing form of tool of philanthropy in the United States, and you may as well be talking to donors who are using this tool in a way that's compatible with the language that they see when we send them, the packet. You should probably get a sample packet from one of the donor advised fund sponsors to see the kind of language we use. You can make a grant recommendation. You can advise a grant, suggest a grant. Technically and legally, we're the donor and not the advisor to the account. There are donor advised fund accounts. So the donor opens up the DAF. They name the DAF. Mine's the Heisman Family Fund. And then I'm the advisor to the fund. And then I recommend a grant. And if it's to a legitimate charity for a legitimate purpose, the grant gets made. What's not a legitimate purpose? Auction items, kids' tuition, any kind of private benefit that's more than about probably $8 or $9. So football tickets, if they get anything in exchange for the gift, a chair, a gala chair, with eating, a gala eating, you can't pay it out of a donor advised fund. So to make sure to recognize that you know what the rules are, donors can't get any private benefit more than about $8 or $9 from their DAF grant. So don't suggest that they use their DAF grant for auction items. Don't suggest that they use it to pay their kids' tuition. Right? There's a lot of ways in which it's not okay, but there's many more ways in which it is okay. And so use that language and get familiar with it. The other thing that we do, and this is not just for small charities, we do it for big charities as well. There's a lot of small or medium-sized charitable DAF sponsors that will help you take an illiquid asset. So we take a lot of illiquid assets, and there's a fund type called a designated fund. It's not a donor advised fund, but if a donor wanted to give you a portion of a privately held company or some restricted stock or some asset that you didn't have the staff or legal expertise to take yourselves, but the donor has that kind of asset, you can have, and we're not the only ones that do this, but I'll just use us as an example. You can open up a designated fund at NPT. I'm going to use Abington Hospital as an example because I work there. For Abington Hospital, the donor would put their asset, we would accept the asset as a gift of an illiquid asset like a privately held company. We would accept that in the designated fund. We would do what we needed to do to make sure the donor got their appropriate receipt. It was valued appropriately, and then we would find a way to sell the asset, and we do a lot of due diligence. We just don't take anything. So before we take it, we would do our normal due diligence. And then we would sell the asset. If it was accepted, we would sell it. And then the net proceeds minus a small fee we charge, you would get it in the designated fund completely. And we charge out-of-pocket expenses, any legal costs that were attached to it, and a small other charge. But the huge, like 90% plus would go to the charitable organization for whom the gift was designated for in this designated fund. So we have done that for charities all over the country. And that's a way in which you can use a place like NPT to accept an illiquid asset, a planned gift that you might not otherwise able to do. So incorporate donor advised fund language into your materials. Read about the restrictions and opportunities of donor advised fund grant making, and then and if there is an illiquid asset, a planned giving opportunity, think of a way that you might want to partner with an entity like ours. We're not the only one, and I know other entities that do it. Some community foundations will do it. Since I cut my teeth in community foundations, I'm really, really, really fond of them and think they do incredibly important work. But there are times in which you can actually partner with us. I think what is frustrating is that people want us to make the case for their charity to our donors as an intermediary, and we don't do that. I don't think any of the nationals do that, because we'd be matchmaking, like we'd have thousands and thousands and thousands of requests. We don't have the technology or tools to match that up, but we do allow our donors to say who they are, their name, address, and contact information in every grant letter. The donors have a chance to identify themselves. Our default is they give their name and I believe their address and contact information, and then and if the donor doesn't like that, they can actually give more information or less, but our default is that we share that information with every grant. So I don't know if that's true of every one of the nationals, but when you're getting a grant letter, don't throw those grant letters away, because the donor information could actually be in the grant letter. And if people are just getting the letters and they see it's from NPT and they ignore the fact that there's a donor name at the bottom, they're throwing away a relationship opportunity. So whoever is processing your gifts and doing your gift receipts, technically and legally, the sponsor, like NPT, is the donor, but the donor information is highly likely in that letter. And if you're just filing that in an NPT file, you're really missing an opportunity to cultivate a donor directly.
Eileen, I have one final question for you, and then everyone here in our audience, please send us additional questions. We've already got a couple of good ones building off this conversation. But my last question is around technology. And some of the technologies that National Philanthropic Trust actually has implemented recently to make it easier for donors to be giving to nonprofits, to make it easier for donors to find the nonprofit they're trying to give to. Can you talk a little bit about some of those tech solutions that you're bringing?
Sure.
Well,
That's great. Thanks. So one of the things we're really proud of is we were the pioneer, along with Vanguard Charitable. And we went live first. Vanguard's, I think, just went live with it. Is we have a partnership with PayPal. So within an hour or two of us approving a grant recommendation, the charity will get an email, and it will have to go into a password protected site. And it can be a PayPal account or ACH, and they can get the money within an hour or two if they go in and they have all those pieces set up. If not, you can preemptively go in and open a PayPal account. And so it means that when donors make a recommendation, instead of waiting a week to get the money, you can get the money within a couple hours or a day. If you don't have one of those set up, whether it's an ACH or PayPal account, you can do that. And so when the donor makes a recommendation, it'll come up to say, this grant will be transmitted through PayPal. The donors have an option to say they don't want it, and some donors don't want it, interestingly. But we just passed our $100 million mark, and we just launched it at the end of last calendar year. So as of yesterday, we surpassed our $100 million of grants through PayPal. And this is an open architecture for all grant makers around the country. So if you work at a community foundation, a private foundation, a grant making entity of any kind, a corporate grant maker, you can have this option be available as a way you can distribute grants. And imagine when you're a recipient of this, when you open up your account, if Vanguard Charitable gave you 4 grants and we gave you 3 grants, and a private foundation who's subscribing gave you 2 grants, you open up one place and you can see the grants. You can download the information into your database depending upon the compatibility, but you can get your money inside this account and move it inside to your bank account, your proprietary bank account, within a few hours. And so we're trying to make grant making easier and more streamlined. We're really proud of it. When we went public with it, we were the first ones to do it, and we'd worked 2 years on building it as an open source for all grant makers around the country. So while there's only a handful of users now, we hope that in the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be thousands of grant makers using this, and it'll make giving money. You'll no longer have to wait for that check in the mail, that you just have to, look for these emails. You'll be saying you just got a grant recommendation that's being sent to you through PayPal. And you have to go into a password protected area to enable you to actually accept the money. So you can't just go into your PayPal account and look for it. You have to go through a whole process, a process we created that we felt was the similar process to what all grant makers would need, and that the donor is not getting any private benefit, that the deduction is not, there's a bunch of things. They're not using it for political reasons. There's a bunch of, elements that had to be checked off. And so it'll be really interesting to see the popularity of this, I hope, just go up. And you can imagine, when we were doing digital I don't know, depositing checks by taking a picture of them, or using Venmo for the first time, or Zelle, or the first time you saw your online banking, you're like, what am I doing? I can't believe this. And now, you know, taking a picture of a check rather than depositing it in an account is very normal. And so we're hoping that this PayPal transmission of grant checks will become the new normal. It's at we're at the early part of it, but I have great aspirations, and it's been exciting to be a part of it. And my team who did it, Charlie and Ellen McGuinn and our IT team and the finance team, my hat goes off to them. It was a long and it was a long path, and PayPal is a great partner, amazing partner.
Love the staff gratitude and recognition right there. That was a great.
They're not even on. I should, but
we'll send them
but I got the notice this morning when I got up really early this morning. I got the notice that we passed our $100 million mark, and the first thing I did was write a thank you to everybody, because I just was so wowed by it. And I love technology and innovation, so it's a great manifestation of, you know, having the world progress. And you can imagine during COVID, people weren't picking out their they were leaving their grant checks uncashed in their offices.
Right.
So this is a way, this interest in doing this was born well before COVID, but it didn't take off till afterwards, because this is two parts to this party. The grant maker and the recipient both have to want to do it. And we were getting reluctance from the grantees initially, but pre-COVID, but once COVID hit, we started to build this whole thing of, you know, the adoption of it is much, much faster.
That there's a tactical question here from Jill McElroy about this and fees.
I may not, you may go beyond my knowledge, but I'll try.
All right, so if we can't follow up, we'll make sure to reconnect with Jill here. But she has a question about the fees and how to lessen the total. Does it lessen the total amount received by the nonprofit?
No, no. They didn't charge us for development of the tool, and you're getting the full amount.
Okay, that's great. That's wonderful to hear. There's another question I had that is something we recommend to organizations about like a plugin that you have that you can actually work.
We are not working with Chariot. In fact,
Okay.
we've asked them to take our name off of their site. We don't know why they decided to use it. We don't have a relationship. We never have had one. And so it's unfortunate that they felt comfortable saying they have one, but we don't have one.
That's interesting. So that's a question from Kathy Sharp here. And also, if you are working with Free Will.
We know Free Will, we like Free Will, but we don't have a formal relationship with them, but we think they do really good work.
Okay, great. I've got a couple of other questions here that I'll shift to, and then we can come back to anything else, Eileen. One is building off of what you were talking about with your donors and helping educate them around what you can use a DAF for, what you can't use a DAF for. Do you have any recommendations, or thoughts about organizations trying to educate their donors in this way? You talked a bit about this language that they can include, but it sounds like there's some confusion around this, and maybe they're hearing some conflicting information from multiple types of DAFs.
So the one rule that got changed in the last couple of years is it used to be that we couldn't honor a pre-existing pledge. So you had to get released from the pledge and then make a new pledge inside your DAF. But a couple of years ago, there was a Treasury Department announcement right around giving season in November that said that rule was no longer in play, and we were now allowed to honor pre-existing pledges where a donor had made a promise before they had asked their DAF to fulfill it. But what never got changed, and we know that there's some sponsors that continue to do it, is it is not, I don't know, it is against the regulations to have what we call a split gift, where we'll pay the part of a dinner that is deductible, and then the donor can pay for the plate of food or whatever. It is not, in our opinion, and our lawyers, and we have an inside counsel and outside counsel, that is not a permissible use of DAF funds, and DAF sponsors that are doing it, I would double or triple check, because the penalties are big when you violate those rules. So I would not do split gifts. I would not suggest that donors do them. If the sponsor wants to do them, they're putting the donor at risk of having a penalty and the charity at risk of having a penalty. It's not pretty. It's like 125% of the gift. So if I were you, I would not even put that kind of language in. And if you want to check with outside counsel, we have some of the best lawyers in the country who counsel us, and nobody that I know is endorsing those split gifts. So I would not do that. And I can't, I mean, if people are deciding they still think it's okay, I can't control their charities, but I wouldn't do it if I were you. So so there's the other one I just saw is about half my DAF. I think if people want to encourage people to half their DAF, they should go for it. You know, some people have their DAF for the long run. They want to pass it on to their kids. Sometimes people are using their DAF, they accumulate some assets and then wait till they're going to make a big major gift, or they're, you know, endow a chair or do something, or they want to make $1,000 gift rather than a bunch of 250s one year. They want to be a bigger donor. So I think that donors have individual motivations for why they have a DAF. So I think some donors with half the DAF would really appeal to them, and others not as much. But I know that sometimes in the half the DAF, they have this campaign where it'll be matched. So maybe, you know, if you have donors like that, that would be great. We don't discourage anybody. We don't have a spending rule. So donors can give out all of their money at any time. We don't have a 5%, 20%. So some donors might give 2 or 3 grants one year and give 25 grants the next year and 0 year 3. If over a 3-year period, if somebody doesn't make a grant, we will knock on their door multiple times, but 98% of our donors are making grants every year. But half your DAF is something, I know that there's a handful of people. There's one person in particular, I think, that's sponsoring with his wife, the two of them, the couple, and I've talked to him on the phone. I was interviewed by the Washington Post about half your DAF, and I said, there's room at the table for everybody for uses of DAFs in all different ways, and I would never discourage anybody from having their DAF. And it's funny, he quoted a lot of people who didn't like it, but not me, and because I thought it was good. So they, you know, sometimes reporters have a point of view as well. So I don't know. So I think that DAFs, some DAFs are meant for 5 years or 10 years in donors' heads, and other DAFs are meant to be, you know, something that their family can use as a legacy giving vehicle. And there's sort of room at that table for all kinds of donors.
In our own grant giving work, we talk about how organizations can be the designated beneficiary of a DAF upon somebody's death. And it's something that a lot of organizations are surprised to learn about. And I think it's great that you talked about that range of how people use their DAFs, and some of them are thinking about legacy planning and family planning. We've got a couple of questions here about new nonprofits and small nonprofits. And you just advise us on some language to stay away from entirely. But we've got a question from Gabriella Grant about being a small nonprofit. Anything else that you would advise for a small nonprofit to just stay away from entirely?
I think you know, I think what you have to think about is what you want to focus on. So I think about, you know, there's annual giving, planned giving, major gifts, special events, prospect research, you know, there's whatever, donors who are, you know, like disaster giving. But I think what you have to decide when you're a small organization is what you need to do in like 2-year chunks. People who have 3-year plans, I think that's too long. But, you know, maybe your early years, you want to develop your annual giving and all your list development and figuring out what ways in which your donors will respond to annual giving, and then maybe identify how you can find 10 prospects for major gifts, right? But you can't do all things for all people. You know, I think the other thing is that don't get overburdened with having too many events. I think events are great for cultivating donors, for acknowledging donors, but they're often not a great fundraising tool, and they burn people out. And so be really careful about doing too many events. They can really, really kind of backfire on you, because they don't net a lot unless you do a really good ad book or ad campaign, which is digital, but it can really, really, really wear you down from other kinds of fundraising that are more cost effective. Events, often you make 50 cents on a dollar. When annual giving, it costs you about 30 cents, so make 70 cents on the dollar. So you should really be thoughtful about what techniques you want to use. I know that starting out, one of the questions I have the most, that I get the most, is how do I get my list of donors? You know, you need to get it from your board. You need to get it from any advisory committee. You need to get it from, you know, small, you know, introductory of events that board members might have at their homes. You could buy a list if they're magazines or topics, or there's list purchasing. Sometimes charities will allow their list to be bought of similar organizations that do something that you have, do prospect research, but getting those early days of collecting names is really, really a lot of very hard work. And I really encourage you to not do it on a spreadsheet, but to have some kind of giving database, a CRM. And I know some of them charge for the only amount of space that you use. So if you only have 1,000 donors, you pay a lot less than if you have 10,000 donors. But I really encourage you to start using them right away, and also have a plan, a fundraising plan. Because one of the things that happens, and I know many of you will be shaking your head, if you don't have a plan and you have a board that it wants to be involved in fundraising, board members will come in every other week, every other month and say, oh, I went to a great auction. Oh, I went to a great event. Oh, I did this, I did that. And we should do that too. And if you don't have a plan, you're going to get pulled in every which direction, right and left, whether it's good for you or not, whether that's a mature organization, not a mature, maybe it's an arts organization and you're a environmental group. And if you have a plan, you can say, no, it's not, the plan should have a budget and it should have a set of activities and it should have a calendar related to it and who's going to do it. And you should have what it's going to cost and what your expected net is, gross and net, right? How much you raised and how much, minus expenses. And if you don't have that, every board member who comes in every other week or every other month with an idea, you're going to get pulled in all these different directions, and you can have your head spin. But when you have a plan, you can say, well, that wasn't on the plan. Maybe we can take something else off, or we can do that next year, or I can do some research on it and get back to you. But it'll give you an anchor of commitment of what you can do and what you plan to do, as opposed to just anecdotal matters that the board brings up because one of their friends invited them to something. And when I talk, and I speak a lot to groups of charitable organizations, and I say, how many people have a development plan? Probably the most that ever hand raised I have is 60%, maybe. So just this is people I'm talking to, around 40% of the small entities don't have a fundraising plan. That's a big mistake. And you know what, with the internet now, you can go and find fundraising plans for small organizations in a nanosecond. When I started in this business, you had to go to 5 AFP conferences before you could figure out what you wanted to do. But you can pull one down and copy from it. Copy not directly, but look at the framework of it, look how it was put together, but it'll really be helpful. The board can buy into it, the other people on the team, the program people, because you need, you don't bowl alone when you're in development. You need a support from your executive director. If you're the executive director, you need support from the board, the program people. This is a group effort. You're not minting money in the back room. My first development job, the people who I was working for didn't like development much, and they would put me at the end of the board meetings, and I did have very many resources, and I thought, these people think I'm minting money in the back room. I'm not minting money in the back room. So it's really important to have that support, and a plan is really a way to do that. And keeping the board members who don't like development away from your plan. So there's always naysayers. There's people that throw water. Oh no, we can't go out and ask that much. We can't do that. Don't do that. I didn't like that. And they're a voice of one, and development takes a series of iterative tasks you have to complete. And once you stop any of those tasks, you stop the possible flow of money to you. So when that board member who may dislike development starts saying, we can't do that, we can't do that, if you have your support of your CEO, you can't listen to every no. And it's hard, especially if there's a lot of politics organization, it can be hard. But just be careful, because board members who really want the organization to do well will often actually block activities that will keep the organization from getting money. It's so counterintuitive. It's such a contradiction to me, but I've seen it happen over and over.
It's a great point, though, especially as we think about the economy and recession proofing it. And your point about starting things and board members stopping them or reprioritizing. I think that's another great piece of advice for any organization that doesn't have a development plan or strategic plan to actually work on that. And one thing we really like in our work around that too, and we find is helpful in talking to board members, is how you're going to measure success. And so really start to think about some of those data points that you can collect to go back to them and say, we had this plan, we stuck to the plan. Look what a great job we did with this plan. We raised all this money, we retained our staff, we met new donors, whatever the metrics are.
Sure.
Something being able to measure that growth and success, we think is really important for those board member conversations. We've got another question here from Adam Wasserman that I think is similar to our previous one, but I think it's more entrepreneurial. And so what advice do you have for a nonprofit that has just been founded and is fundraising for the very first time? Anything else that we didn't already cover?
I think you have to figure out where your earliest money is coming from. Even while donors, if you include bequests, give about 80% of the money in the United States, with Giving USA, the data is about to come out, hasn't out yet. But it's been about 80% are from individuals. If you count and individual giving and bequests. That being said, I think a small startup entities often will get early money from foundations. So I think you have to figure out where your early money is coming from. And hopefully when you launch, you have a sense about that, kind of like a business plan. You have an idea of who your market is and what you want to do and who you're going to go to. If you don't have an early commitment like that, you have to start really doing, digital. So digital is very fast way to go out. But often is lots of smaller gifts, but it helps you gather names. Do not go to Facebook. Facebook will not give you the names of donors. So don't do a fundraising on Facebook because they keep the names and you don't have them. And you need to ask these people again and again. And if Facebook's keeping the names, it's not a good tool. So go out directly. You should think about how many donors you want to have on your list. Year one, do you want to have 1,000 donors? So what do you have to do to get 1,000 donors? You might have to do mailing or outreach to 5,000 or 6,000 people to get 1,000 donors. So maybe you'll get 10% of them from board and friends of and early staff, but the others either need to buy a list or do some intense cultivation digitally or in direct mail. One of the things that's really interesting is, it's only like 15% of the money that gets given online is given online, right? At the end of the year, digital gifts are really common, but there's still a lot of money that gets given in the mail, interestingly. And it's really important to recognize that your donors might be baby boomers who aren't giving online, but they might read a direct mail piece and write a check or do a credit card, or they might read a text message or an email and give online. So it's called multi-channel, that the way you solicit the donor may not be the technique they use to make the gift. So you have to decide how you're going to segment that. Younger donors, you may be able to reach digitally more quickly, but you might be getting many smaller gifts. I don't know what the portals are like that you use. So when, if you want to give $10 for something, I don't know that the charity ends up knowing who those $10 are from. So whatever tools you use, you need to make sure that you're getting the names of the donors so you can then, that becomes your donor pool. But I would absolutely think, a startup development plan for year one. I had a whole development plan for NPT that was a 3-year plan when we started, and I did it based on my experience at a community foundation, which it was a lot of interviews and talking to people. So if you have access to other people that maybe in a slightly different interest area that did a startup, say, how did you start? For your area, I didn't start in a digital age, so I'm not as seasoned as I might be, but I would talk to people that did start charities in the digital world and say, how much your gifts were digital? What was the average gift? How much mail did you use? How successful was email? And I would put those in categories and figure out how to get started. Did you buy a list? Did you list by networking? There's a lot, and it's not, and the thing about this is you can't do it for 5 minutes and be over. It has to be a very iterative, and the more you know, the more you will refine your plan. But you can't just go by the seat of your plants and do something X week 1 and Y week 2 and say you can't do it. You have to have information, and you have to be disciplined and focused on carrying it through.
This is a great point. I have one more final question for you, Eileen, but I
Yes.
just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and Eileen, for everything that you have shared with us. I would take your class, and I feel like a bunch of people are about to sign up at Penn for that program. Just so everyone knows, we will be sending out this recording, so you should be getting that along with some supplemental materials that Eileen and her great team have put together from National Philanthropic Trust. We'll be sharing those with you as well. And hopefully that, in-depth supplemental information can help answer any other questions. We've also included their contact information from National Philanthropic Trust in that note. So if you have other questions, you can reach out to their team, you can reach out to our team. Thank you for joining us for this OR Group Talks. We hope that this was helpful. My final question for you, Eileen, is
Yes.
what advice do you have for these nonprofit leaders who are trying to drive change in the sector?
Don't give up. Stay really energized. The glass is half full. For every one person who gives you a negative comment, there's probably 20 silent cheerleaders cheering you on. But take care of yourself. It's that airline thing, put your air on, cover your own mouth before you help anybody else. It's hard to keep the energy going unless you take care of yourself. So take care of yourself. And when you wake up in the morning, think of what you need and want to do that day. Think of the mission. I think of our mission a lot. It's never lost in me any minute when I walk into work. But know when you need to get a distance from it, know when you need to, take a deep breath, leave work an hour early. But I think that we're 10% of the workforce, and we're 2% of the gross domestic product, but we have a loud voice and we're doing some of the most important work. And don't lose sight of that. And don't lose sight of that, and be as positive as you can to your team, because you'll get that positivity back.
Perfect advice for us all to go have the best day ever today after this conversation and those inspirational words. Thank you so much, Eileen. This has been really great.
Thanks,
I've really
Amanda.
enjoyed learning from you in this conversation. I'm really grateful we were able to bring everyone together today for this. So thank you, everyone. Again, thank you, Eileen. Again, this was really wonderful to hear from you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.